Well, hello everyone, and welcome back. And today we're going to be in chapter 14, which looks at organizational structure and design. And particularly, what we're going to take a look at today is how you blueprint, how you line out an organization for the products and services that you're going to offer and the ministries that you're going to provide the community. So today we're going to take a look at organizational charts and the fundamentals of it and some of the basics of organizational design. So let's go ahead and get started, and we'll focus on design and processes this week. Okay, everyone, welcome back. And today we're on the downhill stretch. We're beginning chapter 14 as we wind down this semester. Now, this week we're going to be looking at organizational structure and design. Now, what do we mean by organizational design? Well, as you can see here on the slide, organizational design is the process of selecting and managing aspects of organizational structure and culture to enable the organization to achieve its goals. So you're looking at both structure and culture so that the organization can do what it's supposed to be doing. And when you think about it, there are different types of organizations, structures and cultures that exist to be able to do its job. A bank, for instance, has a different organizational design than a restaurant, and a restaurant has a different design than a college. Think about the differences in how a bank runs as opposed to maybe Mid-America. And even Mid-America may be different from, let's say, the University of Memphis or Harvard or whatever. So organizational design is providing really a framework so that you can come to the next stage, which is what we call organizational structure. And structure is a system of task, reporting, and authority relationships within which an organization does its work. And here, as you see at the bottom, the core of what coordinates, controls, and motivates employees to cooperate toward the attainment of organizational goals. So if organizational design is the framework, then organizational structure is the internal workings of that organization, of that structure, so that it can do what it's supposed to be doing. Now think about Mid-America. What does it take for you to be able to get your degree? It takes more than just me talking into a microphone or giving you an exam. There are a whole lot of systems. There's a whole lot of reporting and authority relationships that have to occur for you to be able to obtain your degree. And it's the same as a restaurant. You don't just go in and order and poof, everything happens at once. There are relationships, there are processes in place that allow you to be able to obtain your pizza or your burger or whatever you're getting that you're ordering. And when you think about it, for some of you who want to be entrepreneurs, think about what it is you would like to do. And I've talked to many who want to start their own business, and they really haven't given this side of it much thought. They've talked about the financial responsibilities and demands that are going to be placed upon them to start a business, but how are they going to make that product or that service available to the consumer? And these are the things that they don't really give much thought to, but you have to. Until you can do that, you really have no guide or roadmap or parameters in which you can provide for the consumer, whether it be a product or a service. Now, granted, there are many today who are going online to start online businesses and so forth, with it being the information age. But yet, even with that, I would argue that there has to be some orderly process for you to be able to offer that service online and all of that. So organizational design deals with the parameters, the framework, and then the organizational structure. These are the inner workings of that organization that you've designed so that the organization that you designed will run efficiently and effectively. Now, one of the ways that you can get an idea of how an organization operates is by looking at the organizational chart. Now, the organizational chart is a visual display of what that company does. It shows you the positions, the people, the reporting relationships, how communication flows, and so forth. And it'll allow you to get an understanding of how formal or how informal that organization is. Now, many times when I have gone into organizations that have asked me to help them with their companies, one of the first things I want to look at is the organizational chart. Once you understand the fundamentals of the organizational chart, then you can start to get an idea of how that organization works, how it relates, how it processes, and how it communicates. So the organizational chart is that visual display of that organization. Now, oftentimes, another thing that you have to realize too is that what is put on paper or what is displayed isn't necessarily what is actually occurring. So with the organizational chart, even though they may say this is how we relate to each other and this is the structure, it doesn't necessarily mean they follow that. Now, characteristics of the organizational structure. You have, first of all, the division of labor, and that's the extent to which employees specialize or generalize. Now, in the past, the common way of thinking was that the more specialized the person was, the more efficient and effective they're going to be. And there's truth in that. People like Max Faber, Frederick Taylor, some of these people who were proponents of division of labor and bureaucracies felt that the more you do something, the better you're going to be at it. And if this is all you did, eventually through trial and error, you're going to be an expert in that. And that's pretty much the truth. But the problem with that is that if you're doing one thing over and over again, you're going to go insane with boredom. And that's what they found back in the 20s. And this is going back a ways, but in the 1920s, when Ford Motor Company started to mass produce the automobile, they would have workers do one thing. You may be responsible for putting the right front tire on one of those Model Ts, and that's all you did. And in a while, you would figure out that in order for me to be faster and more efficient, in which they wanted you to be, you would place maybe the parts closer to you, and you would have a system in place so that you could be the fastest producer of a right front tire on a Model T than anybody else who might compete with you. But the problem with that, if that's all I'm doing 8 hours a day, 5 days and 6 days a week, then I'm going to go crazy with boredom. And that's what they found out. And many people were leaving the company. Now, back then, Ford was paying $5 an hour. Now, back in the 1920s, that was a lot of money, folks, but they couldn't stand to just sit there and do the same thing over and over again. So this is where we started looking at job rotation and all of that. But anyway, the division of labor deals with how specialized or generalized these employees are when it comes to their work. Span of control is the number of people reporting directly to an individual. And we're going to see here in a minute an example of a organizational chart that shows a wide span of control where one individual may have purview over many people. And there are pros and there are cons to it. But our span of control does deal with the number of people directly reporting to an individual. Hierarchy, that's the degree to which some employees have formal authority over others. Now, in a bureaucracy, you have a lot of hierarchies. You have from the worker then supervisor, and then maybe manager, and then higher manager, and then director, and so on and so forth. Hierarchy deals with the number of strata that exist within that organization. Are there a lot of middlemen in that organization between the CEO and the frontline worker? So hierarchy is the amount of employees who have formal authority over others. Now, formalization deals with the extent to which organizational rules and procedures are written down and closely followed. Now, Max Faber, I mentioned him a while ago with division of labor. He is who we consider to be the father of bureaucracy. And bureaucracy deals with specialized labor. It also deals with a great deal of hierarchy because you have all of these different levels of authority within a bureaucracy. But another thing that typifies a bureaucracy is the degree of formalization. A bureaucracy or a bureaucratic organization will operate based on rules and procedures. And once they're written down, they have to be followed. The military, government work is probably the best description of a formalized organization that we have today. Many organizations have gotten away from that. There are basic rules that are just generalized, but many organizations today realize that the changing nature of business requires that we be flexible, that what might have been the standard one day may not be the standard the next. So, formalization. They can't do anything without looking at rules and procedures to guide them. And then you have centralization, and that's the degree to which power and decision-making authority is concentrated at higher levels of the organization rather than distributed. So a centralized organization would be an organization where the CEO is a boss and the vice presidents under him, or today her, flows down. There's the top-down approach to authority and decision-making. They tell you what to do, and that's it. There's very little bottom-up communication where they take your input and integrate it into their strategy. Most of the time, centralized authority rests with the CEO, and then it all goes downhill from there. Now, the organizational chart. Now, this is an example of a pretty much a traditional bureaucratic structure. You have here the CEO, and normally every organization will have that. There's nothing there that's unique or unusual. You have the vice presidents, and then you have managers, and then from there you have associates, and from there you can have supervisors, and I'm just adding to it. And then you can have workers, but even within supervisors or managers, you can have all types of different fields. Now, you also have managers. When it comes to managers, here's what really is the Achilles heel, one of the Achilles heels of a bureaucracy. You may have the manager of HR. You may have the manager of operations. You may have the manager of finance. Finance. And you may have the manager of marketing. As you see, each one is separated. They're not together. Now, when it comes to specialization, each one of these people are experts in their field. There's no doubting that. If I wanted, as the president, if I was a president of an organization and I wanted to know some answers to some financial questions about the performance of our company, I don't have to go searching. I'm going to go straight to finance, and that financial manager or VP is going to be able to give me the information that I need. But the problem with this is that When you are divided out like this, you become territorial, and in fact, you become isolated. Because you're all separated out, you tend to only live within your own world. For instance, HR probably doesn't get involved with operations. Marketing probably doesn't get involved with finance, and operations probably doesn't get involved with finance and finance with ops and all of that. So you become isolated and you work in what we call a silo. That means the decisions that you make, you really don't regard the other departments in making those decisions. Now, I worked for a school. I was a consultant and looked at the organization of this school. It was a college, and they were going downhill quickly. They were on academic probation. I mean, it was a nightmare. And one of the fundamental problems that they had that was keeping them from being able to perform effectively was this very problem. No one wanted to talk to the other. Each department felt like it was the only one that mattered. I mean, and this is a college, and you had the business department thinking, well, if it's not for us, this college wouldn't exist. And you had the professors and the academic departments saying, well, if we aren't here, the school can't run. And even within the academic departments and other departments, they were fighting amongst themselves. So it was a mess. But this is what can happen a lot of times when you, what we call functionally departmentalize these organizations. That means you are spread out by function or by department. So now another thing that you see here is a narrow span of control. You have vice presidents and managers who are overseeing their own little worlds. So this section over here doesn't get involved with this section over here. And then you have the divisions here where people don't get involved with anybody else. So you see narrow lanes of authority being created with this. Now, some of the consequences of this type of structure, well, there can be a lot of conflict. There can be a lot of competition. People are not working together, but they're working against each other as they're in competition for other things. You also have a slow way of communicating. Now, think about it. Let me erase all of this here and kind of give you an idea of what I'm talking about. If you want to communicate quickly to the decision makers, look at all of the strata or the departments that you have to go through. First of all, the associates have to go to the manager. Manager has to go to the vice president. Vice president goes to the president. And then eventually it'll all have to flow down to the associates again to figure out what's going on, if they even listen to the lower levels in that organization. So information has to go through a lot of hands. And as a result of that, information is slow. Sears was a prime example of that. Sears would not let their employees make decisions there at the cash register. If someone wanted to return something, then that associate would have to call a manager or a supervisor, and that supervisor would have to leave and go to that person and personally authorize any exchanges, any refunds, or anything like that. Well, think about how slow and how inconvenient that is for the consumer. People were backed up and they just decided they didn't want to shop like that, especially when you're looking at other companies that will let the associate make the decisions right there and go from there. So you see here with the span of control being narrow in a bureaucracy, things are slow and you have the tendency to be in turmoil. Now, a wide span of control, this is what we call flattening the organization. And you see here all of the strata, or much of the strata, have gone. And you see maybe the VPs or managers. I don't know which ones they are. It doesn't really matter. But you see fewer people taking control of a larger amount of individuals or associates here. Now, here's the reasoning behind this. If you saw in the last slide where there were many levels to go through to communicate with the decision makers, then you can appreciate this model, because as you see, there's not a whole lot of distance between the CEO and the associates here. So communication is quicker. But now here's the problem. When you put all of middle management's responsibilities on the backs of just a few people, things fall through the cracks. You can't be that efficient and effective. And you certainly can't give the responsibility to the associates here who are not qualified or trained to do the job themselves. So what they found in organizations was that when we got rid of the middle managers to flatten the organizations, that much of the expertise that it took to organize and control the processes and the relationships went with them. So they brought back middle management. So today, even though we do have middle managers and people who have historically weighed down or slowed down the organization, today we are looking at different models, such as the learning organization, the matrix models, and so forth, that we'll look at here a little bit later, and been able to utilize the expertise of our managers without compromising the relationships and compromising the flow, the quick flow of communication and information. Today we got a brief overview of what organizational processes, design, structure is all about. We took a look at the organizational chart. One of the things that I'd like for you to do is to look at your organizational chart. You should have one in business, and you should have one actually in ministry. Many churches have one. But it'd be interesting to know if your church has one and your business has one. If you get a chance to take a look at one, look at it, and tell me what you think as we go into the interactive forum. We may make that one of the issues for Forum 1 this week. But take a look at it, see how it differs or is similar to what we see in the textbook, and what you read into that organizational chart as you take a look at it from what you've learned.